Let me just squeeze in here a little bit. Okay. So, I've been struggling with writing my first chapter recently. So I kind of read every first chapter I could get my hands on, and this is what I've learned. Just a disclaimer, I am not a professional author, though one day I would love to be one. I am just a girl on YouTube who loves dissecting stories and obsessing over topics until I'm that one crazy person standing in front of a wall, lacing clues together with red string. And then I take all of that and I tried to make a coherent video out of it. And then you get this. So basically what I'm saying is that what I have to say in this video is not law by any means. If it doesn't work for you, toss it out the window. But hopefully some of these things will help you and me write a first chapter. That's the goal today. All right, before we get into this, if you're new, welcome. I'm Moon, and it is a pleasure to have you. But don't forget to hit that subscribe button, all right? It's like right down below. Just got it? Okay, let's go. I don't know about you, but I have been staring at a blank white page for months now. And I have other scenes in my story. Like I have things written and fleshed out a little, but my first chapter, I got nothing. There's all this pressure for it to be perfect. You sit down at this blank white page and it's yelling at you to create something unique and interesting, and you freeze up and you write absolutely nothing. Because yeah, how can we write something absolutely perfect if we have nothing in our minds? But let's take a step back from that, all right? Because before we have a perfect first chapter, we need an actual chapter to work off of. Not a perfect chapter, just a basic foundation. And there are 3 major components that you need to make up that foundation: your tone, your setting, and your characters. So in this video, we're going to break down each of those components and talk about them thoroughly. So grab out your notepad, your computer, whatever you write notes on, and let's talk about first chapters. Lesson 1, establish the tone. The tone to a story is a bit hard to define because tone kind of refers to the feeling that the story gives. Is it funny? Is it dark? Is it whimsical? This isn't genre or archetype. You can have 2 stories that are both murder mysteries, but one is dark and serious while the other is funny and lighthearted. Let's take a look at these 2 completely separate beginnings. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. But now let's take a look at A Game of Thrones. The morning had dawned clear and cold with the crispness that hinted at the end of summer. They set forth at daybreak to see a man beheaded, 20 in all, and Bran rode among them, nervous with excitement. This was the first time he had been deemed old enough to go with his Lord Father and his brothers to see the king's justice done. So these 2 stories obviously have 2 separate tones. Harry Potter gives us this feel that things are going to be a bit mysterious and funny and not taken very seriously, while Game of Thrones gives us this feeling of griminess, of darkness. The story is going to be taken very seriously and probably a lot of bad things are going to happen. Now, that's not to say that your whimsical, fun story isn't going to have dark tidbits to it, and your dark, grimy story isn't going to have some funny scenes. This is just your overall tone of the story, the feeling of the story that it gives. I'm sure if anyone has watched Game of Thrones and Harry Potter can say that yes, these 2 stories have 2 completely separate tones. Now you could say that that is maturity level. In a way, tone kind of hints at the maturity level because tones that are a lot more lighthearted and funny do tend to be more of a middle grade book, because middle grade books don't want to take themselves too seriously because kids won't enjoy them. But there can be plenty of adult books like Lord of the Rings that has these lightheartedness to them. Now, there's no wrong answer to how you want your tone to be. That is completely dependent on you and your story. Your plot could be about really sad and serious topics, but your tone can still be lighthearted and funny, taking kind of a grim humor approach to the story. Establishing your tone is just about not giving your audience whiplash. You don't start a story like Harry Potter with silly, funny scenes and then brutally murder everyone in the next chapter. Establishing a tone is like making a promise to your readers that your story is going to be a certain way, and you don't want to break that promise. Now, you can also have two conflicting tones in your story. By conflicting, I mean that you're mixing something like the creepy horror vibe with something funny, or something goofy and whimsical mixing with something that's dark and grimy. And this actually happens a lot, and it's one of my favorite things to see in shows because I just love having that mixture there. Something that does this perfectly is Pirates of the Caribbean. Now, I know it's not a book, but oh my goodness, is it perfection. I love Pirates of the Caribbean, especially the first one. Let's actually talk about it in terms of what I would call its chapter 1 and its prologue. So obviously, if you have two conflicting tones, you're gonna have to choose which one you're gonna focus on at the beginning of the chapter. In Pirates of the Caribbean, what I would call its first chapter, it likes to focus more on the goofy, the funny aspect of the movie. So it opens up with Elizabeth Swann. She's getting fitted in her dress. She's making jokes. Everything seems casual. We have Johnny Depp riding in on a sinking boat. It's a complete goofy scene, and it's wonderful to watch. But if you've seen the movie, you know that the entire movie isn't like this. There are dark, creepy scenes happening throughout. So how do we establish to our audience that that is part of the movie or book? Well, for Pirates of the Caribbean, first of all, they introduce it in their prologue. Instead of having a funny, goofy prologue, they decide to have a darker prologue, having these ships be torn to pieces and there's fog everywhere. They've set up this creepy tone. But not only that, after we get out of the prologue and we're in the first chapter and things are, like I said, goofy, we don't take too much time in the goofiness before we start introducing that darkness again. And even Stranger Things uses this exact formula. You have the beginning prologue where we introduce the gross monster and he's killing somebody. And then we switch to this cute, charming scene of these four boys playing D&D. And we have some lightheartedness, it's some funny scenes. And then we slowly bring back in that dark griminess as Will heads home and the monster is hunting him. So keep that in mind though, if you are writing two different tones like that in your story, decide which one you're introducing first, and then how you're going to slowly add in the other one before you end your first chapter. Okay, hey, so this isn't a sponsor, don't click away. I just hit 5,000 subscribers because of you guys, so thank you guys so much. I'm actually recording this after the outro, so if the outro also says something about that, just ignore me, I'm just a crazy person. But listen, I want to do a Q&A video where you guys ask me questions and I answer as many of them as I can. This is a pretty small channel. I would assume I can answer every single question I get sent because honestly, there might be 10. There might be 10 questions. I don't really know. There might be one. I might get on here and make a 5-minute video answering one question. I don't really know yet, but I did post a community post. At least I think I have, because obviously I'm posting this Friday and I'm assuming I made the community post on Wednesday. Not really sure, but you know, that's a possibility. But on that community post, it says you can ask your questions and I will answer them in the next video. So if you want to go post your questions there, you can, or you can post them down in the comments below on this video. And then I will be posting a video in like a week or so of answering all of your questions. And it can be about anything. If it wants to be about the book channel, if it wants to be about, I have no idea. I don't know what you guys want to ask, or if you even want to ask anything. Maybe I'll just do like a quick studio tour. I'm in a bedroom. But anyway, I might just show you guys my setup or whatever else you guys want to see. That's all I have to say. So back to the other video. Bye. Lesson 2, establish your setting. Your story setting is a multitude of things, but I'm going to narrow it down to the 4 main components. Your time period, your magical element, your specific location, and your wide location. Now, this doesn't mean you start your story with this fact sheet of my main character is in this location at this time period doing this magical thing. Setting is best explained when it's hidden in the background. One of my favorite things when I was reading all these first chapters was that I would sit down and I would take notes on each chapter, writing down, okay, this is the main character, this is the time period, but I wouldn't remember why I thought that was the time period until I went back and reread it. It's just so cool how these little hints would be hidden throughout the story, like someone is holding a sword. So instantly my brain says, oh, it's a medieval time period. Or someone's working on a robot. And I'm like, okay, they're in the future. I think it is so amazing how our brains just pick up on those subtle clues, those just one word clues, and we instantly start creating this time period and location around us. And as writers, we need to use this to our advantage. Instead of explaining in detail that this is 1300s, this planet on this location during a medieval time period, we just need to add little clues because people don't need to know all those facts. They just need to know the gist of what kind of technology are we to expect? What kind of buildings are we to picture? What kind of clothing are we to picture? So let's actually talk about each of these 4 components individually, and I'll give you guys some examples on how stories do this. I want to talk about wide location first because I feel like it's one of the most important things to get across to your audience. And by wide location, in general, I just mean, are we on a different planet or are we on Earth? Sometimes this is simply answered by adding a map to the beginning of your book. We see a map there, we know it's not Earth, so we move along and we keep reading. But most of the time, this is answered by talking about the wide location. For example, after a year of slavery in the salt mines of Endovier, Selena Sardothian was accustomed to being escorted everywhere in shackles and at sword point. The Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. Since salt mines of Endovier is pretty foreign to me, I can assume this isn't Earth. Now, no, it's not directly told to me that this is a different planet and maybe there is a place called Endovier in some island that I never heard about, but we can come to this assumption that it's not. Also in this sentence, by adding the fact that she's at sword point, we can assume that the time period is around a medieval time period, which I thought was pretty cool. Now let's look at Percy Jackson. My name is Percy Jackson. I'm 12 years old. Until a few months ago, I was a boarding student at Yancey Academy, a private school for troubled kids in upstate New York. We automatically know that this is Earth because of New York, obviously, but not only that, but we also know that it's a modern time period because he's in a boarding school. It's really quite easy to do. Every book that I read just kind of name drops a location, and it's either going to be a location that we're familiar with in Earth, or it's gonna be a place that we've never heard of, so we can assume it's not Earth. Cinder was the only full-service mechanic at New Beijing's weekly market. Earth. The puff of soot fell like black snowflakes, descending upon the dark city of Luthadel. Not Earth. You don't have to be super clear or detailed here. This is just the first chapter, but we do need some kind of hint pointing us in one of the directions, Earth or not Earth. Now, of course, it might be a reveal to your audience that this whole time the character has actually been on Earth and instead have thought it's a different planet or a different world. Now, in that case, obviously, in the first chapter, you don't want to give hints that it's Earth. That's simple, that's fine. Just give hints that it is a different place, use different names to make it feel like a different world or a different planet, and then have the reveal show up later. That's easy enough, I can understand that. In that case, it's okay to lead your audience to believe something that's false, as long as it has to do with the story. The time period is the next most important thing, because the time period kind of establishes this overall backdrop that we create for ourselves in the story without you specifically influencing it as the author. And so by time period, I don't mean is the story in the 1920s or the 1930s. Like, we're not talking about specific details here, okay? Basically, we kind of just mean, is it medieval? Is it industrial? Is it modern? Or is it futuristic? That's kind of the 4 main gist. Now, there are time periods in between those, and you can be flexible with those, but those are kind of the main 4 that our brain is going to snap to depending on what you say. Like I said, your audience kind of needs an idea of what to expect technology-wise, transportation-wise, style of building, style of clothes. Your time period influences all of those things. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. Harry Potter. Simply mentioning the morning traffic instantly puts us in that modern time period, and not only that, but we're in a city. Our brains instantly create this backdrop of buildings and cars and city life around us. We don't picture him in the middle of a desert on a highway. We picture him in a town. A stained tablecloth divided Cinder from the browsers as they shuffled past. The square was filled with shoppers and hawkers, children and noise. The bellows of men as they bargained with robotic shopkeepers, trying to talk the computers down from their desired profit margins. The time period here is clearly some time in the future. What time exactly? We don't know, and that's okay. We just need to know that it is futuristic and not our modern time period. This one is a bit on the nose, and that's completely fine, but you can also be really vague about it. They set forth at daybreak to see a man beheaded, 20 in all, and Bran rose among them, nervous with excitement. This is the first time he'd been deemed old enough to go with his lord father and his brothers to see the king's justice done. Now here, nothing really stands out time period-wise, other than just by the subtle hints of the words that they use. There's beheadings, he calls his father Lord Father, and then there's a king. So we can assume by some of these hints that it is a medieval time period, until we're told otherwise. As your book continues, I do expect you to add more details and hints as to what the time period is. In the first chapter, I don't expect all those details to be there, but I do expect there to be some hints leading us to believe what time period it is. Now, what if your time period isn't like Earth's? What if you have a world with robots, but instead of it being a futuristic world, it's actually an industrial world? Dune is kind of like this. It has this modern futuristic feel because they're spaceships and they're traveling from planet to planet, but they use very medieval weapons. They use swords. Now, in this situation, the most important thing to describe here is going to be the backdrop. So obviously Dune, like I said, is a more futuristic world. That is the backdrop. They wear space-like clothing, they have spaceships, everything feels more modern. It doesn't feel medieval. The only thing that they use that's medieval is the swords. So in this case, and like this book starts, it starts by explaining that they do use spaceships to travel. So it gives us that futuristic backdrop. We can understand, okay, this is sci-fi. This is a sci-fi world. And then it introduces the fact that he uses a sword. If it was switched and we were introduced to the main character using a sword first, immediately our brains would have been saying this is a medieval setting. We would have already been establishing what the buildings look like, what the clothing looks like, without us even being told that. So it's always good to establish what the main setting is first, and then introduce the weird things like the swords or the robots. If you have your industrial setting, but you show the robots first, we're going to instantly be thinking this is a futuristic world instead of what we should be imagining, which is a grimy industrial world. So again, you show the industrial part first and then introduce that there are robots in this world. The main goal with time period is making sure that you set up the correct backdrop before the audience starts making up their own. Specific location. Now, when I say specific location, I just mean where the character is right now. Are they walking through the city? Are they in a jail cell? Are they in school? Tell me where they at and what they're feeling, what they're seeing, what they're sensing. I feel like this one is pretty obvious. I feel like a lot of people is going to get this one right because they do like describing where our character is living. But I have seen some people just kind of skip this entirely, and instead we dive deep into the character's thoughts, not understanding where they're at or what they're doing. And we start creating kind of this blank white room around them because they haven't mentioned anything about their surroundings. They're just thinking. So you don't want to do that. You do want to make sure that we understand where the character is, and then you can head deep into their thoughts and their thought process while they are in their surroundings. Now, the main thing I do want to talk about with specific location is don't describe things that are outside of our character's view. Okay? Now, I actually see this happen a lot more. Our character may be inside of a building, right? But the author wants to describe the city beyond the character. And so they start describing how the city looks, even though the character themselves aren't looking at it. Or maybe the character's at school, but he's describing what his house or his mom looks like. These are things that we don't need to hear right now. If these things are important to your story and important to get across right there at the beginning, then you probably should change where your character currently is at and put them in a setting where they can be looking at that thing. That makes sense. You see, this is important to note because as writers, when you're describing your setting, I said it before, it should be in the background, right? So when you're describing your setting, you also need to be doing a second thing. And usually that second thing is describing your character, who they are, how that setting impacts them. Instead of just noting what the whole city looks like from an outsider's perspective, we're instead diving into the character's head and what they think about it. The ancient ruins were plentiful, but here there wasn't so much as a single crumbling wall to cast a measly shadow. Nothing but open sky and unfettered wind pressed on my chest. Dance of Thieves. This line isn't just telling us what the setting looks like, but it's telling us how the character feels about the setting. We can tell the character feels uneasy, that she doesn't like this open land. Do we know why yet? No, but we're finding out more information about our character as we understand the setting. There are two amazing lines that come from Mistborn. You have the prologue and the first chapter, and they both start with the same first line. Ash fell from the sky. The prologue goes like this. Ash fell from the sky. Lord Trusting frowned, glancing up at the ruddy midday sky as his servants scuttled forward. The first chapter reads, Ash fell from the sky. Vin watched the downy flakes drift through the air, leisurely, careless, free. One perspective hates the ash. He looks at it as something grimy and gross, and then he goes about his day. It's not really bothering him. The other character loves the ash. She sees it as something careless and free, and she wishes to be like the ash. So not only do we see how she perceives the ash, but we also see that she's jealous of the ash, that she wants to be free and careless. I think it is so amazing how you can describe the same scene in so many different ways depending on the character's eyes that you're seeing it from. And this doesn't just work for first person. Most of the examples I gave you were in third person. This works in a multitude of ways, so don't think that, oh, my book isn't in first person, so you can't really see through my character's eyes, because you still see through their eyes. It's just told in a different way. Now, the fourth component, magical elements. Now, I put magical elements at the bottom here because some stories just don't have magic. I know we're talking about fantasy stories in general, but there are a lot of fantasy stories that don't have magic. You know, you have Hunger Games, you have Scythe, you have Divergent, things like that. For those of you who don't really care about the magic segment, you can jump on over to genre. But we're going to talk about stories that have magic in them and how you introduce that magic in the first chapter. Out of the 30-some books that I read that had magic in it, every one of them did these two things. They mentioned the magic, and then they didn't explain the magic. So let's talk about the first one, mentioning the magic. Whether the characters were already living in a magical world, or if they lived in a normal world and never knew magic existed, the first chapter always mentioned the magic. In Harry Potter, Dumbledore shows up and makes a street go completely dark. In Percy Jackson, we see Percy somehow use water to grab a girl, and in Mistborn, Vin uses a power she calls luck. Now, there were some stories that didn't necessarily show off their magic, but like I said, they still mentioned their magic. So in Throne of Glass, no magic was really shown, but it mentioned that magic was banned about 10 years ago. And in Dance of Thieves, it is mentioned that the character doesn't have the gifts she is supposed to have. Now, I did have one book out of all of them that did not mention the magic in the first chapter. And I hated it. I hated reading this chapter. I was so bored. Now, as a series, I really enjoyed this book. I read it about 7 years ago. And I really enjoyed it. It's a middle grade book, and it's set in this world where almost everyone is a werebeast. So there's were-lions, were-bears, were-snakes, things like that. And it's a lot of fun. But for some reason, in the first chapter, they don't talk about the werebeast or show them off. And what's even weirder is that it's not a world where the boy doesn't know that they exist. Like, he knows that the were-lion sits on the throne, but he doesn't mention it in the first chapter. It's so strange to me, because that's the gimmick of the book. That's the thing, but you're not going to show it off in the first chapter? I think maybe the author thought it would be more fun to show off the werebeast in a more spectacular way than mentioning them in the first chapter. But honestly, like, I mean, look at the cover. Like, I know what's going to happen. I know there's going to be werebeast, all right? So you don't have to hold off on them. And honestly, I think it just kind of makes the book worse and harder to get through when you hold off on showing off your book. If you're going to show off your book, you need to show it off in the first chapter, or people are just going to put it down and stop reading. Now, let's talk about the opposite side of the spectrum. Over-explaining your magic. Like I said, all the books that had magic in it showed the magic in the first chapter, but they also didn't explain the magic that they were using, like at all. In Harry Potter, we have no idea how Voldemort makes all the street lights go away. We don't know how McGonagall turns into a cat. We don't know how Percy Jackson used the water. We don't know how Vin uses her luck. We are left in the unknown while showing the spectacular. And honestly, I think the reason that it's not talked about in the first chapter is because your first chapter is meant for the most important things. It's meant to show off who your character is, what your plot might be, what your tone is, what your setting is. We don't need to sit there and have a school lesson about how the magic works. And that's not to say that the magic wouldn't be interesting later. It's just we need to get involved in the story first before we care how the magic works. And again, I read one book out of all of them that did explain its magic. And I'm going to read a line from the middle of the first chapter for you. Seals, if you're not familiar, are forms of magic that are designed to suppress something else. You can think of a seal as a sort of magical barrier or container, but one specifically designed to keep something inside, unable to escape. The most famous seals are generally to prevent some sort of monster from escaping, like keeping the buried trapped in the labyrinth caverns beneath the world. Other seals, however, can be placed on individuals or items to limit their abilities. A seal on a cursed sword to prevent it from being drawn, for example, or to suppress the negative effects on drawing it. This is one paragraph from the first chapter. And though I can agree that this information would be interesting later when I understand more about how the world works, in this moment, I knew that I was going to be bored. I was going to be bored in this book because I did not want to have a school lesson while I was trying to get to know my character and his situation. I was just too overwhelmed with information that I didn't want because I didn't even know if I cared about this book yet. Why would I care about the magic system if I don't know if I care about the character? Some people really enjoy reading books that explain the magic and don't go too hard into the characters because that's all they want. They just want a magic system. That's what they want to learn about. I think that's really fun. I think that's really interesting that some people enjoy that. But the majority of readers are reading to have a story. They want to know about the characters first before understanding the magic. So if you're wanting to appeal to that wider audience, then the best bet is to hold off on explaining your magic. But this is just the bare minimum basic information. You don't have to take it as law. If you want to write how your magic works in your story because you find that the most interesting part about your story, write that. You should write that. Lesson 3. Interesting characters. Your characters are the most important thing to your story. You could have the world's greatest plot, the greatest idea that you've ever had for a story, but if your characters are dull, boring humans, it's gonna be a terrible story. But if you flip that around and you have great characters with a possibly really bad plot, people could still really love it. Because as long as those characters are developing and learning and becoming better people, or maybe their relationships are developing, we as humans, we love that. We love watching people grow. This is why we love scrolling. We love Instagram and Twitter and things like that because we like keeping up with humans. It's a weird thing about us, but we do. So in stories, the main thing that we want to connect with is the characters. Now, we're not going to be talking about making lovable characters, all right? That definitely needs a video of its own, which will be coming at some point. This is just the first chapter, all right? There's only so much you can do in one chapter, but we are going to talk about making your character interesting. And there are 3 things that I think you should consider when making your character stand out. And that is their flaw, their capability, and their goal. Number 1, their flaw. If your character has a defining flaw, you might think it's best to just completely ignore that. Why would you show your audience a negative side of your character if you're trying to get your audience to like that character? Here's the thing. Flaws make your character relatable, which is very important when it comes to liking a character. Humans are very flawed creatures, so when we see another person being flawed, we relate to that. We understand that. We sympathize with that. Not only that, but a flaw can help show us how that character is going to progress and change throughout the story. So if you introduce a character who is sexist, like Sokka, then you introduced how that sexism hurts him, then we understand, oh, this is a flaw that's possibly going to bite him back in the butt. And it does in 3 episodes. Now, my definition of a flaw for the purpose of this video is anything that causes your hero problems. Now, this flaw can be something that they need to change. Maybe they're selfish. Maybe they don't trust anyone. Maybe they're sexist. But it can also be something that they don't have to change, that just makes them who they are. This could be anything like being stubborn, quick-tempered, or feeling the need to save everyone. For me, the flaw kind of combines with defining character attribute. So for Percy, he is quick-tempered and has no filter. This is his defining attribute, but it's also his flaw. This is something that will get him in trouble later, but also what makes him a hero. And the same for Harry Potter. He is stubborn and sarcastic, and this is something that gets him in trouble at Hogwarts all the time. But because of those attributes and those flaws, he ends up saving Hogwarts. Now, this doesn't mean that their flaw is always going to be their defining attribute. Their flaw might only be a hindrance, and in those cases, you would expect the character to want to change that flaw throughout the story. Number 2, their capability. Capability can be a lot of things depending on your story. It could be their ability in magic, their ability in thieving, their ability in fighting, anything that is a skill that is related to the story. And there are 2 reasons that you'd want to establish the character's capability. One is showing progress. So if you have a character that is going to get really good at fighting or really good at using magic, you obviously need to show where they're starting. And it's best to show that in the first chapter, show kind of their skills and their magic. In Mistborn, Vin is introduced using her luck magic, but she doesn't really have much control over it. She doesn't really know exactly what she's doing or how she's doing it. So this is a great starting point to see Vin at before we see her get better and better at using her magic. And again, with Avatar: The Last Airbender, we see Katara struggling with the water bending, and then by the end of season 1, she's almost as good as a master. Now, the second reason to show capability is to show your character's skills, right? You don't want to be in the middle of a book and suddenly our character is great at shooting a bow and arrow. We want to show that at the beginning if that's going to come up later. It is good that in Hunger Games we see how well Katniss can hunt before we see her in the Hunger Games. This is something I noticed in the Netflix show Arcane. There is a character named Caitlin. Now, she's not really a main character. She's kind of a side character that becomes more important as the season goes. But we have this episode, one of the episodes in the middle of the season, and suddenly we are shown Caitlyn's past. We are shown that she is hunting with one of her guards, and this is how she trained to become a really good shot. And in that episode, where that flashback is shown, we see Caitlyn using that skill. This is okay, but I feel like this is a cheap way to do it, because I would have felt like it was a lot more satisfying if in the beginning of the season, when we first met her, we saw that backstory and then brought it back up later. It just feels cheap. Like if at Hunger Games we skipped the beginning that Katniss was a good shot, we just completely ignored that. She went to the Hunger Games and then suddenly she was really good at shooting a bow, but then said, oh yeah, I hunted back in my village. It would have felt cheap. It would have felt like it just kind of came out of nowhere, even though it didn't. So if your character does have a skill of something and that is going to come up later in your story, you definitely want to show off where either that skill came from or what they do with that skill now for it to make sense later. Number 3, their goal. The goal is the driving force for your character and is sometimes referred to as the why. Why do they want to make the android work? Why are they in a rush to school today? Why do they want to win the race? We want to understand what their motivation is. A character who is basically happy sitting around all day and doing nothing is boring to read about. But if you give them a motivation and a goal, suddenly they become productive and they become interesting. It shows what they care about and why. Vin needed this scam to succeed. Kamen threatened her and beat her, but he considered her a good luck charm. She wasn't sure if he knew why his plans went better when she was in the room, but he had apparently made the connection. That made her valuable, and Reen had always said that the surest way to stay alive in the underworld was to make yourself indispensable. Mistborn. This comes from the first chapter of Mistborn, and it gives us kind of this look into Vin's head of what she considers important. She considers survival important. That is her main goal, is just to survive in this underworld. But we also see her motivations for later. When she joins this heist group, she's not joining because she wants to save the city. She's joining because this is the only way she can survive. Without this information, Vin would feel like a pushover. Why is she listening to this abusive crew leader when she could be doing something else? Now, the last thing I want is for you to feel overwhelmed by all of this. If you're starting from scratch and you don't even have a full-fleshed character, this could be a bit daunting to try to figure out, oh, what is their flaw, motivation, and capability. The best way I found to make this simple for new characters is I first pick a defining attribute. Are they stubborn? Are they selfless? Do they have a hero complex, etc.? And then I give them a task and why they're doing it. So to make this simple, I have a girl who's selfish. Her task, she is currently stealing something. Why is she stealing something? Because she's part of a thieving group and her boss wants her to. Why does she work for this boss? Because she owes him money and she can't leave until she pays him off. And then we can run off of this kind of like a butterfly effect and start adding things like she's the best thief of the group. Why is she the best thief of the group? Maybe she lived on the streets her whole life and had to steal things in order to survive. And not all of these things need to be put in the first chapter, but it's good to just kind of run off some ideas and start writing them down. And whatever you like, you can keep and start working into your story. And whatever you don't like, you can toss. You know, it's a very simple way to get the ball rolling. There's one more thing that I want to talk about characters that I see almost every book do, and that is introducing your characters in an uncomfortable state. Having someone be uncomfortable not only instantly builds sympathy between the audience and the character, but also helps us understand how that character reacts in imperfect situations. We don't care how someone wakes up, if they wake up like every other person in the world, but we do care how they react to a bully. Do they run away? Do they fight? Do they faint? These kind of things tell us about their personality and who they are. Vin is introduced hiding from her crew leader because he abuses her, so instantly we feel sympathetic. But then when he hits her, we see her reaction to it and what that says about her personality. She hides her pain and fear because she thinks those are weaknesses. Leah from Kiss of Deception is in the process of getting her back tattooed with a marking that seals her fate. So instantly we feel sympathy for her, but her reaction to that is that she runs away, refusing her fate entirely. Harry Potter wakes up in a broom closet where we know that he's mistreated by his aunt and uncle. So instantly we feel sympathy, but then we also see how he reacts with a sarcastic tone to his aunt, showing that he's not afraid of them. Depending on what kind of situation you put your characters in, you can take this moment to really establish their flaw, their capability, or even their motivation. Lesson 4, putting it into practice. This is something that I got from Mary Robinette in a Brandon Sanderson lecture, and I will link that down below so that you guys can watch it also. But Mary Robinette is a short story writer, so she understands how to comprise a lot of information in a very short time. She says in the first few sentences, she gets out the who, the what, the where, and the genre. And this is basically what we just talked about, but in simpler terms. The who is our character, the what and the where is our setting, and the genre is our tone. Her example was, hydraulic fluid dripped out of the roller coaster's AI straight onto Chelsea's jockey ID. Where the heck was that leak? She has the who, Selena, the what, she's fixing the roller coaster, the where, she's under the roller coaster, and the genre. The roller coaster is AI, so this is a sci-fi genre book. Not to mention that we see a bit of the character's attitude in this scene just by how she responds to the leak. Not every story works this way, especially in a 400-page novel, but I think it is great practice to get into. Trying to get all that information out in just a few sentences is really challenging. But let me tell you, it really got me out of my little first chapter stump. It was simplified for me. I was like, okay, so I just need my character, where they're gonna be, what they're gonna be doing, and how this relates to my genre. And instantly, I had my first paragraph. Was it a good paragraph? Am I gonna keep it? Probably not. I'll probably be tweaking it a lot. But I finally had something on the page after months of just staring at nothing. And that is a great first step. I wanted to do this video because I feel like a lot of us struggle with those first chapters. We get stumped, we freeze up, we look at that blank page and we think we can't do this, but I'm hoping that you see that it doesn't have to be that complicated, that you really just, you need your character, you need your tone and your setting. And it doesn't have to be in a perfect order yet. It just needs to be on a page. You just need to write something. Because once you have something, then you can perfect it later. So pull out your laptop, a piece of paper, whatever you write on, and start playing around with different paragraphs that introduce these three things. Your tone, whether it's dark, funny, whimsical, your setting by introducing your wide location, specific location, magical element, and time period, and by introducing your interesting character by showing their flaws, capabilities, and goals. Overall, the most important thing is to not get too stressed and to just keep writing. Consistency really is the key here, and also reading. Oh my goodness, I learned so much from this current project of reading all these first chapters. Like, I finally start to understand what I like about first chapters and what really hooks me personally and what I like seeing in books. And honestly, that's the most important thing, is what do you enjoy reading? Because I read all these first chapters and I decided what I like to see, but that doesn't mean it's what you like to see also. You might have something else that you like entirely that I didn't even mention. So if there was a favorite chapter of yours, a favorite first line, or something that you notice about first chapters that you love, leave them down in the comments below. I love hearing from you guys. I love hearing your opinions on stories and what you guys like, because that's also important. You know, when you're writing a story, you need to take into account what everyone likes, not just yourself, but that's the most important. But you also need to think about what other people like to see, because that's what you're writing books for. You're writing them for yourself and for other people to read. Hey, I just wanted to hop in here and say, I am so sorry for not posting in like forever. I was planning on taking just a short summer break for 1 month. That's it. And then that 1 month turned into 3 months, I think. It's been 3 months. I feel so bad. I'm so sorry, especially to my Patreons. I'm gonna put your guys' names up here real quick. I'm so sorry because like you guys support this channel and I just feel terrible for not providing like the content for the month. I think what happened is that I just got a little too overwhelmed with the YouTube thing. It's very hard, even though it's almost been a year, to really organize your like life around the YouTube videos and the editing and the posting on top of like a job and kids. And then I was getting my kids ready for school because we're homeschooling, and yeah, it was a lot. But I think I have my schedule pretty figured out. So the plan is at least once a month. Hopefully I stick to that. Hopefully more, honestly. I'd rather do twice a month videos, but we'll see. We'll see with how the schedule works and the holidays coming up. But thank you guys so much for like sticking around and being subscribers and for really supporting this channel. Thank you guys so much. I'm actually really surprised. I don't know if you guys noticed, but we've hit 5,000. Like, that's amazing. That is awesome that we've hit 5,000 subs. It's so cool. But hopefully we hit 10,000 pretty soon. I think this is definitely more than what I thought would be at this point. So this is great. So thank you guys so much. That's all I have to say. So I will see you guys later, hopefully soon. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and goodbye.